The front door creaked open like a warning no one heeded, and Evelyn's heart thudded against her ribs as she stepped into the dim hallway of her son's home. The air hung heavy with the scent of takeout gone stale and unspoken resentments that had festered for months. She had come unannounced as she often did, driven by that nagging maternal instinct that something was rotting beneath the surface of Thomas's picture-perfect life. At 62, Evelyn carried her prejudices like a well-worn coat, subtle at first, then suffocating, especially since the day her golden boy married Aisha. The muffled thuds echoed from the living room, sharp and rhythmic, like fists against a heavy bag in some forgotten gym. Evelyn's polished loafers froze on the threshold. Her mind raced ahead, painting horrors she dared not name. Thomas, her Thomas, the boy who had once mowed lawns for extra cash and dreamed of a quiet life in the suburbs, could he be unraveling? And Aisha, that woman with her radiant dark skin and unyielding gaze, the one Evelyn had whispered about at Bridge Club, calling her exotic with a curl of her lip that betrayed the venom beneath. A crash shattered the air, a lamp toppling, glass scattering like brittle accusations. Evelyn's breath caught as she edged forward, peering around the corner. There, in the flickering light of the television casting shadows like accusing fingers, she saw it. Thomas's arm raised, his hand connecting with Aisha's cheek in a sickening slap that echoed through the room. Aisha, 7 months swollen with child, recoiled against the wall, her hand instinctively cradling the curve of her belly. Her eyes, wide with a storm of pain and defiance, locked onto Evelyn's for a split second, long enough to pierce through the older woman's denial. Evelyn's world tilted. This wasn't the poised, educated black woman her son had foolishly elevated. This was vulnerability laid bare, a scene that clawed at the edges of Evelyn's carefully constructed worldview. Why her? Why couldn't Thomas have chosen someone simpler? The question slithered unbidden into her thoughts as another blow landed, softer but no less cruel, and Aisha's body slumped. Evelyn's mouth opened in a silent scream. What had she ignored all these months? And what unspeakable force would compel her to act now, or forever seal her complicity in the shadows? Evelyn had always seen the world in neat compartments, family on one side, outsiders on the other. Her life in the leafy enclave of Willow Creek had been a tapestry of church potlucks and neighborhood watches, where whispers about those people moving in next door were as common as the summer cicadas. Thomas, her only child, had been her anchor, tall, earnest, with his father's blue eyes and a promising job at the local bank. He had courted stability, or so she thought, until Aisha entered the picture 3 years prior. It started innocently enough, or so Evelyn told herself in the quiet hours before dawn. Thomas met Aisha at a diversity workshop his firm mandated. Ironic, Evelyn mused bitterly, that such things were now required to broaden horizons. Aisha was a teacher, sharp-witted and unapologetically proud of her heritage, with roots tracing back to the Great Migration and stories of ancestors who had marched for rights Evelyn had only read about in history books. Their romance bloomed in stolen coffee dates and weekend hikes, a collision of worlds that Thomas described with boyish excitement. "She's incredible, Mom," he'd say, his voice alight. But Evelyn saw the fractures from the start, the sideways glances at family gatherings, the way her sister's husband joked about spicing things up, the undercurrent of doubt that seeped into every conversation. The wedding had been a battlefield disguised as a celebration. Evelyn hosted it in her backyard, the white tents billowing like sails against an unseen storm. Aisha glowed in a simple gown, her natural curls framed by a veil that Evelyn had reluctantly pinned. But as vows were exchanged under the oak tree, Evelyn's smile tightened. Whispers from relatives, "He's too good for that," pricked like thorns. She justified her silence then, chalking it up to protectiveness, but deep down, it was fear. Fear that her son's choices would drag him into a world of judgment she knew too well from her own youth, when keeping to your own was gospel. Marriage settled like dust after a gale. Thomas and Aisha bought the modest 2-story on Elm Street, filling it with bookshelves groaning under civil rights tomes and framed photos of their travels. Aisha's laughter rang through the house, A melody Evelyn visited but never joined, yet cracks spiderwebbed beneath the surface. Thomas, once so steady, began retreating into long hours at work, coming home with shoulders hunched and eyes distant. Aisha confided in friends about the microaggressions they faced. The neighbor who crossed the street when she walked alone, the bank's subtle delays on their mortgage application, the way Thomas's colleagues patted him on the back for going multicultural like it was a hobby. Evelyn fueled the fire unwittingly, or perhaps not. Her weekly calls dripped with concern masked as care. "Thomas, are you eating properly? That girl, woman, does she cook those spicy things? You look tired." Aisha endured, her belly growing round with their first child, a boy they named after her grandfather, a quiet act of reclamation. But the weight of it all pressed down. The societal sneers that followed them at parks, the way Thomas absorbed the poison of concerned friends who warned him about cultural clashes. Evelyn saw none of this, or chose not to, until that fateful afternoon when the veil tore. As the pregnancy advanced, Aisha's glow dimmed under fatigue and unspoken fears. Thomas's touches grew rougher, his frustration spilling over in ways that blurred the line between stress and something darker. Evelyn dismissed the signs, attributing Aisha's quiet pleas for family support to drama. Little did she know, the storm was brewing, fed by the very prejudices she had sown, waiting for the moment it would erupt and demand reckoning. The months leading to that shattering moment had been a slow unraveling, thread by thread, as the weight of unseen forces bore down on the fragile home Thomas and Aisha had built. Aisha felt it first in the subtle shifts, the way Thomas's hand lingered too long on her arm during arguments, not with affection, but with a grip that spoke of containment. He never named it anger at her, at them, but the air crackled with it, charged by the world's relentless gaze. It began with small erosions. At a backyard barbecue hosted by Thomas's old college buddies, the laughter flowed freely until someone cracked a joke about woke wives making men soft. Aisha smiled through it, her hand on her swelling belly, but Thomas's jaw clenched, his beer bottle gripped like a lifeline. Later, in the car ride home, his silence thickened into accusation. "You didn't have to bring up that Frederick Douglass book," he muttered, eyes on the road. Aisha's heart sank. She had only shared it to bridge the gap, to show him the resilience in her bloodline. But to him, it felt like a reminder of differences he was tired of defending. The incidents escalated, insidious as fog rolling in. Aisha's doctor appointments became battlegrounds, Thomas canceling last minute for work emergencies, leaving her to navigate the sterile halls alone, fielding nurses' pitying looks that carried undertones of another single mother. Society's racism intertwined with their private hell, a landlord overlooking their complaints about suspicious neighbors peeking through blinds, a grocery store clerk following Aisha too closely while Thomas shopped unchecked. These slights accumulated, eroding Thomas's patience until he lashed out at home, his fists clenching against invisible foes he blamed on her world. Aisha endured, her body a vessel for hope amid the storm. She journaled in the quiet nights, scribbling affirmations for the child who kicked defiantly within her. "You will know love without chains." But the isolation gnawed. Her own family, scattered across states, urged her to leave. But pride, and love's stubborn residue, held her fast. Thomas's outbursts grew. A slammed door that shook the nursery crib, a shove during a heated exchange over holiday plans with Evelyn, who had declined the invitation with a curt email about prior commitments. Each time, Aisha absorbed the blow, physical and emotional, whispering to her reflection that this was not her fault, that the poison seeped from cracks in the foundation society had laid. Evelyn, oblivious in her sunlit kitchen across town, sipped tea and scrolled through neighborhood forums rife with veiled complaints about changing demographics. She sent Thomas care packages of his favorite casseroles, slipping in notes that read like veiled warnings. "Take care of yourself, son. Family comes first." Her prejudice, honed over decades of unchallenged privilege, blinded her to the mirror it held up to her own role. When Aisha reached out once, voice trembling over the phone about the mounting tension, Evelyn's response was a frosty, "Marriages have ups and downs, dear. Work it out." The dismissal landed like salt in a wound, reinforcing Aisha's solitude. In that suspended heartbeat, as shards of the broken lamp glittered like accusations on the hardwood floor, Evelyn's world fractured irreparably. Thomas's chest heaved, his knuckles raw and flushed, oblivious to his mother's presence until her gasp sliced through the haze. Aisha slid down the wall, her back scraping paint, one hand splayed protectively over her belly while the other pressed to her swelling cheek. The room pulsed with the aftermath, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the faint lavender of Aisha's prenatal lotion, a cruel reminder of nurturing twisted into nightmare. Thomas whirled, his face a mask of shock morphing into defensive fury. Evelyn's mind reeled, fragments of denial crashing against the evidence before her. This couldn't be her boy, the one who had bandaged her scrapes as a child, who promised to build a life of quiet decency. Yet there he stood, transformed by shadows she had helped cast. Aisha's eyes met Evelyn's again, not with plea but with a raw, unfiltered accusation that stripped away the older woman's pretenses. In that gaze burned the accumulated weight of every slight, every sidelong glance at family dinners, every concern Evelyn had voiced about the marriage's viability. The air thickened as Thomas advanced on Aisha once more, his voice a low growl lost in the narrative's silence, but his intent clear in the tremor of his raised fist. Evelyn's body moved before her mind could catch up, a surge of maternal fire propelling her forward. She wedged between them, her slight frame a barrier against the storm, her hands shoving Thomas back with a force born of desperation. He stumbled, eyes widening in betrayal, the son she had armored against the world, now the monster she couldn't unmake. Aisha rose unsteadily, her breath ragged, dignity clinging like a frayed thread. The child's kicks fluttered against her ribs, a frantic Morse code of survival urging her onward. Evelyn turned to her, hand outstretched, not in pity, but in a dawning recognition that clawed at her chest. For the first time, she truly saw Aisha, not as the interloper who had stolen her son, but as a woman forged in fires Evelyn had never faced. The bruises on Aisha's arms peeked from her sleeve, purple blooms of endurance, and Evelyn's stomach churned with the realization that she had dismissed similar shadows in phone calls, attributing them to hormones or cultural differences. Thomas lunged again, grief and rage twisting his features, but Evelyn held firm, her voice silent yet her posture a roar. She grabbed his arm, nails digging into flesh she had once cradled, forcing him to meet her eyes. In that locked stare, the dam broke, not with tears, but with the flood of truths long submerged. Evelyn saw the cycle. Her own father's belt marks excused as discipline, the racist barbs she had laughed off at socials, the way she had planted seeds of doubt in Thomas's heart with offhand comments about sticking to your kind. It had all converged here, in this violent tableau where personal failing met societal sin. Aisha, drawing on reserves she didn't know she possessed, stepped forward. Her hand touched Evelyn's shoulder, a bridge across the chasm, and in that contact the room's chaos stilled. Thomas deflated, sinking to the floor amid the debris, his body racked with sobs that spoke of a man unmade. The climax crested not in further blows, but in the shattering of illusions. Evelyn's prejudice, once a shield, now a mirror reflecting her complicity. She pulled Aisha into an embrace, tentative at first, then fierce, the pregnant belly pressing between them like a vow. The injustice of it all, the layered violences of race and relation, hung palpable, demanding not just survival, but transformation. In that raw convergence, the path to redemption flickered, fragile as dawn through storm clouds. In the days that followed, the house on Elm Street transformed from a battlefield into a sanctuary of reckoning. Evelyn stayed, her presence no longer an intrusion but a quiet vigil, brewing herbal teas for Aisha's bruised body and holding space for the silences that words could not bridge. Thomas entered a haze of accountability, his mornings filled with therapy sessions where he unpacked the venom of internalized racism, the colleagues' jokes that chipped at his pride, the societal script that painted his marriage as a concession rather than a choice. Aisha, though scarred, began to reclaim her narrative, her hand tracing patterns on her belly as if etching stories of strength for the child who would arrive in the spring. Evelyn's change was seismic, a tectonic shift that reshaped her foundations. She devoured books from Aisha's shelf, Baldwin's Fire, Angelo's Resilience, each page a confrontation with the blindness she had worn like blinders. At bridge club, she spoke up when a familiar slur slipped out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "That's my daughter-in-law you're talking about," she said, the words a declaration of alliance. The backlash came, whispers, exclusions, but Evelyn stood firm, the pain of isolation a small price for the clarity it brought. The baby arrived on a crisp April morning, his cries a defiant symphony that filled the delivery room with promise. Named Jamal, after Aisha's grandfather who had faced lynch mobs with unbowed head, he became the thread weaving their fractured family. Thomas held him first, tears carving paths through the regret etched on his face, vowing silently to dismantle the cycles he had perpetuated. Aisha watched, her heart a mosaic of forgiveness and vigilance, knowing healing was not linear but a daily choice. Through it all, the racial injustice that had simmered beneath their story boiled to the surface, demanding witness. Aisha filed charges against the subtler aggressors, the bank's discriminatory practices exposed in a community hearing, the neighbors' stares confronted in block meetings Evelyn now attended. Their tale rippled outward, shared in support groups where black women traded stories of endurance amid erasure. Thomas volunteered at local anti-bias workshops, his voice a bridge for men like him, trapped in the crosshairs of privilege and pain. As seasons turned, the family rooted deeper. Picnics under that same backyard oak became rituals of reclamation, laughter mingling with honest reckonings. Evelyn, once the architect of division, became its unmaker, her love for Jamal fierce and unfiltered, a granddaughter's future already imagined without the shadows of old. In the quiet evenings, as Jamal's tiny chest rose and fell in sleep, Aisha would trace the faint scar on her cheek, a reminder not of defeat but of survival's cost. Evelyn sat nearby, her hands folded in her lap, the weight of what she had almost lost etched in every line of her face. What if she had walked away that day? What if prejudice had claimed another victory? But it hadn't. And in that hard-won grace a question lingers, sharp as a siren's call. How many homes still echo with unseen blows, where racism's quiet complicity turns love to ash? Will you look closer, listen harder before the next door creaks open? The choice is yours. Will it shatter your world or rebuild it stronger?